Shuvit Adonai lenegdi tamid. Shuvit Adonai lenegdi tamid. Ki mimini balemot. Lachein samach libi v'yagel kivodi. Ach bisari yishkon levetach. Ki lo tazov nafshi lish'ol. Lo titein chasidcha lerot shachar. Todieni orech hayim. Sova smachot et panecha. Ni'imot b'mincha netzach. I've set the eternal always before me. God is at my side, I shall not be moved. Therefore my heart exults and my soul rejoices, for my being is secure. You will not abandon me to death, nor let your faithful one see destruction. You show me the path of life. Your presence brings fullness of joy. Enduring happiness is your gift. These words from the 16th Psalm. We gather here today to honor the memory of Brian Zable, son, husband, father, doctor, friend, neighbor, brother. In our tradition, we have three pieces to our funeral service. One in Hebrew we call nechama. It means comfort. We say words of comfort mostly from the book of Psalms, but from some other places of biblical writing as well. Psalms to comfort your souls, his family souls, and most importantly, Brian's soul, as it goes on the journey me'olam hazeh le'olam haba, from this world to the world to come. In our second part of our memorial, we say words of hesped, another Hebrew word that we usually translate as eulogy or life story. We'll do that here at Temple Shalom. And then finally, we'll make our way together over to Sons of Israel Cemetery. We'll engage in the third part of our memorial in Kavura, which is our burial ceremony. We continue with some of those words of comfort from the book of Psalms. We read from Psalm 144. Adonai ma'adam v'te'adehu ben enosh v'tichashvehu. Adam lahevel dama, yamav ketzel over. Baboker yatzitz v'chalaf, la'erev yomolel v'yavesh. Tashev enosh ad daka. Tomer shuvu b'nei adam. Adonai, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you are mindful of us? We are like a breath. Our days are like a passing shadow. We come and go like grass which in the morning shoots up renewed, and in the evening fades and withers. You cause us to return to dust, saying, "Return, O mortal creatures." Would that we were wise, that we understood where we are going. For when we die, we carry nothing away. Our glory does not accompany us. Mark the wholehearted and behold the upright, for they shall have peace. Of all the Psalms of comfort, perhaps the most well-known is the 23rd Psalm. You hear its words in Hebrew and in English. Adonai rohi lo echzai, beno deshe yirbitzeni, al mei menuchot, yinahaleni, nafshi yishovev, Yanchini b'magle tzedek, V'magle tzedek leman shemo. Gam ki elech b'getz al mavet lo yirara, lo yirara, ki ata imadi. Shiftecha u'nishantecha, ema yenachamuni. Taroch lefanai shulchan neged zorarai. Dashanta b'shemen roshi kosir vaya. Ach tov v'chesed yudifuni kol yimei chayai. V'shavti b'veit Adonai leorech yamim. God is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, and restores my soul. You lead me in right paths for the sake of your name. Even when I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You've anointed my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in God's house forever. When King David, or whoever it may have been that wrote the Psalms, was writing these Psalms, he or they were inspired by the places around them. In my imagination, the 121st Psalm was written in the north of Israel, staring up at the mountains that now the tallest one is known as Mount Hermon. Since we're in Colorado, I think I'm allowed to tell you that you can ski there. Okay, so it's like the Bunny Hill anywhere here in Colorado, but there's snow and you can slide down. But I imagine that King David, or whoever it was that wrote the Psalms, was staring at those mountains when he wrote this psalm. Because every time I read this psalm here in Colorado Springs, I think about staring at Pikes Peak. And I think about staring at Cheyenne Mountain. I think about staring at the beauty of these mountains and what they inspire within me, and I'm pretty sure they inspire within all of you, because that's why we all live here, right? And the psalmist wrote this: Esainai el heharim me'ayin yavo Ezri me'im Adonai Ose shamayim ve'aretz. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. This is the source of my help. My help comes from Adonai, the maker of all that is in heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. See, the protector of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian. God is your protection at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. God will guard you from all harm. God will guard your soul, your going and your coming, now and forever. We find comfort in ancient words and also in more modern words A more modern Hebrew poet wrote these words that I'll read to you in translation that speak to us of the journey of life. Birth is a beginning, he writes, and death is a destination. But life is a journey, a going and a growing from stage to stage, from childhood to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion and then perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength, or strength to weakness and often back again, from health to sickness and back we pray to health again, from offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat. Until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, an aliyah kedusha, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning and death is a destination, but life is a journey, an aliyah kedusha, a sacred pilgrimage, made stage by stage, from birth to death to life everlasting. In the book of Job, we read his cry out in desperation. The world around him is falling apart as he sees it. And he says, Adonai natan va'Adonai lakach yehi shem Adonai mevarach. God has given and God has taken. Blessed is God's name. Like Job, we cry out in a similar way. Adonai natan. God has given. God gave Brian Zable to the world to be a family member, to be a friend, to be a doctor. And we cry out to God and say, Ba'adonai bakach, and God has taken away. And I know the questions that all of you are asking right now. Why so young? Why from this disease? Why with suffering? Why now? And I'll tell you right now the answer to all those questions. The answer is I don't know and you don't know, and we will never know the answer to those questions. And so I want to tell you this, my advice to you. Stop asking those questions because they're worthless. Because any question that doesn't have an answer, in my opinion, it's a worthless question. Let's ask different questions. How? How did Brian Zable make the world a better place? I already see people shaking their hands because you know the answer to that question. Excuse me, let me correct myself. You know the answers, plural, to that question. What did I learn from Brian that makes me a better person? Who are the people whose lives that he made better in his role as doctor, in his role as neighbor and friend, in his role as family member? If I asked you all to answer those questions, we'd be here all day and tomorrow and the day after that. Because I'm sure if we gave the short version of the answers, it would only take us 3 days. If we gave the long version to those answers, I don't know how long it would take. But let's not ask why. Because all we will find in that question is frustration, is sadness, is the misery that we can't find the answer. But if we're to find an answer from a life who gave so much to so many, we can ask those other questions. The what and the how and the who. Those are the questions that we know the answers to. And those are the ones that can help bring us comfort. As we look to that comfort, we know that for each one of us, when someone we love dies, that there's a tear in our heart. There's an expression that we all know that I learned when I was a young child, and I think probably all of you did as well. Time heals all wounds. I don't know who the moron is who wrote that sentence, but that person was wrong, because time doesn't heal all wounds. What time does, time gives us the ability to figure out how we deal with the wound. Because if time heals all wounds, and I know there's more than one doctor in the room who can explain this medically better than I can as a rabbi, but here's how I understand it. When you heal a wound, there becomes you sew it together, or there's a scab or whatever, and when the stitches go away, and when the scab goes away, it's healed, and we forget about it. I don't like time heals all wounds. What I like is this. Time gives me the opportunity to find the spiritual Band-Aid to put on my heart. And every time I touch or see or feel that spiritual Band-Aid, I can remember beautiful memories. I don't want the wound to heal. I want to figure out how to live with the wound and let the wound inspire me to do great things, and do them in Brian's memory. And so we begin to tell this story of our torn hearts. And as we do, the immediate family, you have your Kriya ribbons. And so if you take those ribbons in just a moment, now we'll do it first and then I'll explain. And as you tear the ribbon, you're going to tear it about 2/3 of the way up right now. And as you do, you're going to repeat these words after me. So take your fingers on, as you rip the ribbon, Baruch Atah Adonai, Dayan HaEmet. Praised are you, Adonai, the one true judge. In olden times, we used to wear sackcloth and ashes, and we would tear our clothing. Today, our clothing costs more than sackcloth and ashes. There are still some people who actually tear their clothing, but for others, we tear this ribbon. And what does the ribbon represent? The ribbon represents our torn hearts. As we go through this day and through other days, I know that all of you right here in the front and all the rest of you will cry, and I hope you'll also laugh. Laugh at a funeral? Yes. Because if you only cry, it means you only have sad memories. But if you laugh a little too, it means you have happy memories as well. But we wear the ribbon because in those moments when we laugh, and there aren't tears in our eyes, those around us might not see the tear in our hearts, even though it's there, even in those moments of laughter and those moments of smiling. And so we wear the ribbon to say, even though in this memory I have a smile on my face, this ribbon represents that I still have a torn heart inside. And it's a reminder to the community. And so I ask you all to cry today, and I ask you also to laugh today. Let those beautiful memories interrupt your tears a little bit and put a smile on your face when those joyful memories come to mind. With our torn hearts, we begin to tell Brian's story. We're not going to tell the whole story because, as we said before, we don't have days and days to be here to do it, in this room at least. But all of you do. Y'all have these things. Text stories to each other about Brian. Call each other, email each other with a great story that you remembered here or there, and tell Brian's family and Brian's friends But we'll start to do that here today. So we're going to begin by asking Brian's sister Elise to begin to share with us some memories and to begin to share Brian's story.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming here today and for listening on Zoom. I wish we weren't here today. I wish that today was an unremarkable Tuesday and we were doing what we do on Tuesday and Brian was home going about his day. But today is not an ordinary Tuesday. What to say about Brian? He was a great brother. Not at first. He teased me when we were young, and then fortunately Robbie came along and Brian's energy was redirected. Thanks, Rob. I was more like Switzerland, clinging to neutrality and hit by an occasional missile that went off course. But for all of our young lives, it was Brian, Rob, and me together. We sometimes fought, but more often we had fun. We built forts and we played board games. We went sledding on the neighbor's hill behind our house. We made toxic secret potions and sat on the front porch waiting for our weird neighbor Patty Cray to walk by in the hope that we might convince her to drink it. She never came. We concocted elaborate tricks to play on babysitters, but wore ourselves out in all the scheming hours before the babysitter arrived, and so just wound up watching TV and going to bed. Brian and I once put Robbie in a box and rolled it down the stairs. We were both stunned to be sent to our rooms. As our motivation was innocent, we were scientists. We were wondering what would happen. So we weren't so successful in our darker endeavors, but I think success wasn't the point. It was the meeting of minds, the connectedness. That was the point. And this ethic, whether conscious or not, was one he carried with him his whole life. He listened, he was curious, he wanted to be together in whatever joint enterprise was underway. It made him a great doctor, a great friend, a great brother. He drew you in, and he didn't try to turn the discussion back to himself, which so often happens in conversations. We overlapped for 2 years at Cornell and then years later in Baltimore, where he and Mary moved after residency. I loved having my big brother close by. These days, there is much written and studied about loneliness. We are in the midst of an epidemic of loneliness, we read. It is harming our physical and mental health. Many adults report having few, if any, close friends, especially men. But that wasn't Brian's life. Look at everyone here today, everyone on Zoom. People have flown in from all over the country. During the past year, so many friends offered assistance, driving him to doctor's appointments, sitting with him in the hospital, bringing him bagels, tending his garden, where he delighted in growing these weirdly stunted vegetables. When he went for his second CAR-T treatment, I had to fight for a spot to be his caregiver. I don't know many people with such a wide and devoted community of friends, which says a great deal about him and about many of the people here. I remember his nurse in the clinic where I took him during his CAR-T treatment when he was so sick. She put in an IV and then turned away from us and whispered, "He's my favorite patient." I think to herself, maybe for comfort or for strength. Since entering hospice care several weeks ago, a daily stream of friends have come, sitting with him, talking to him even though he was half deaf, bringing food even though he had no appetite, even rooting for the New York Giants. And of course, Mary came and cared for him so graciously day in and day out, and our parents sat by his side. Brian was sick for 15 years, and during that time, I think I heard him complain only a handful of times, although I know he suffered. Maybe he knew others were also struggling with one thing or another, or maybe he didn't want his illness to take up so much space. He would ask about the goings-on in my family as if they had the same weight as what he was contending with. But he kept living. He worked when he could, he traveled, he read. He raised 2 fabulous kids with Mary and saw them graduate from college. He watched an inordinate amount of football. He had a brilliant, wry, self-effacing sense of humor that never succumbed to his illness. What courage that must have taken to keep despair at bay for so long. It feels as if an important piece of the past and the future has left us, and the world is diminished. I will miss him.
Thank you, Elise. We now call upon Brian's mother, Barbara, to share some words with us.
Come stand next to me. I'll try to get through this without blubbering too much. Thank you. Jack and I have been blessed with wonderful children, grandchildren, and daughters-in-law. Brian was our firstborn. When he was a very young child, he was somewhat attached to me and shy. As a new, nervous mom, I worried that as he grew up and went out into the world, and he could encounter bullies and other people that were not so nice, would he be able to stand up and fight for himself? Well, my concerns were for naught. He proved to be a fierce fighter against a terrible disease for 15 years. All through it, he hardly ever complained, and he was so appreciative of the medical care he received. He had some wonderful qualities. He was kind and caring and thoughtful, to name a few. But one word best describes him. He was a mensch. Mensch is a Yiddish word meaning someone with integrity, honor, morality, dignity, and a sense of what is right. Among his many qualities, as most of you know, he had a terrific sense of humor, which he, I think, inherited from his dad. One day, while visiting us in our home in Boulder, I started to fix breakfast. He noticed that I used eggs from free-range chickens. He asked me why I bought those particular eggs, and I said, I like the idea that the chickens had a nice life. They were not cooped up and could roam freely. He immediately quipped, "What do you think, Mom? The chickens go to Mexico on vacation every year?" And just a few weeks ago, he was intent on going downstairs to sit in his favorite lounge chair. It was a huge struggle for him to do so, and he was quite winded when he got there. Once he caught his breath, he looked at all of us sitting around, Jack and I and Elise and Robbie, and he said, I know it must have been tough for all of you to keep up with me. Several years ago, Jack and I had a bad year health-wise. Someone must have been looking out for us Because Brian was with us that night, I came home from the hospital after having surgery. Brian noticed that Jack did not seem or sound quite right and knew immediately that he was having a stroke. He got me into a comfortable chair in the living room, knowing that I was full of pain meds and unsteady on my feet, and warned me, "Mom, just sit there and do not move or do anything stupid." He then whisked Jack to the hospital, called Mary to come down and stay with me, and when he learned that they were going to helicopter Jack to a larger stroke trauma center in Denver, he drove to the hospital and sat throughout the night with him. Then he went into action to make sure that Jack went to a rehab facility immediately after he was discharged from the hospital. The rest of our family came also to help out tremendously. He loved his family and extended family and cherished his friends. He so looked forward to our family gatherings at Thanksgiving and July 4th. He was determined to live life as fully as he could. This summer, after receiving a blood transfusion, he was happy so happy, he said, he now has a full tank and could go east to join his Cornell pals at their reunion. Likewise, he was determined to stay alive so he could see his medical school buddies and boyfriend friends who visited him from all over the country. And he always perked up and looked forward to the many, many visits from his local friends. As many of you know, he loved watching football. When he was a kid, he was a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. Every year, I would have to go to the local men and boys store and hope that they had a Pittsburgh Steelers jacket in his new size, as he outgrew the old ones. But as an adult, his loyalties changed, and he became a big New York Giants fan. Of course, he rooted for the Broncos as well. He had a lot of interests and things he liked to do, sailing being one of them. He was a very good sailor, and fortunately, he was able to go out in our little Sunfish sailboat with his daughter Claire at the lake where we have a cottage in upstate New York. He loved being a geriatrics physician and taking care of older people, and he was a wonderful listener, and they were so appreciative. Sometimes things work out for the best. This summer, Claire returned from New Zealand earlier than planned. She was able to spend some quality time with her dad and be there for him for his last few hospitalizations. Thank you, all of you who could come today and those who are Zooming in. We want to especially thank Mary, who came from Seattle to take wonderful care of him these last few months and other times as well. Thank you to all his friends who came from all over the country to visit him, and his local friends who couldn't do enough to help. And finally, thank you to all our friends who kept calling and emailing. Sorry. And texting. You want to finish?
Calling, email, texting their love and support, and their acts of wonderful kindness toward us.
He will be missed.
We invite Brian's childhood friend, Eric Ginsberg, to share some words with us.
I apologize in advance, I'm kind of winging it here. I guess I've known Brian as long as I can remember. I tend to say that we were friends since 4th grade, but I'm sure it was earlier than that. I grew up with the Zables. I'm sort of representing the Vestal, New York shtetl here. The Ginsbergs, Nemesis, Hubbles, Krauts, Schneiders, others I'm forgetting. Many of them would be here if I could. Before I forget, the sailboat, Mrs. Zable was mentioned, the sunfish was named Zable and was painted in this crude black and white checkerboard pattern. Brian and I spent a lot of time on that boat. We spent a lot of time playing pool in the Zable's basement. We made 8mm movies. Actually, one of them was a stop-motion animation of a football game with a chess set with a little wooden Goodyear blimp flying above it. If anybody can find that movie, it'd be great. I don't know if it still exists. Mainly the things I remember about Brian, the tilt of his head, that probably lives on in some of the other Zables. Played football in the street, back when you could play football in the street, yell car when a car came and get out of the road. And he was one of the few people where one or the other of us, probably usually him, would say something and we'd start giggling. Long before pot was ever legal, we would just get the giggles and it would set us off for an hour. And sometimes it was somewhere appropriate, sometimes it was somewhere inappropriate, like here. And we couldn't look at each other for the next hour. And then we moved around the country in different places, and we were sometimes in closer touch or out of touch. But we'd hear about each other through the Bubby Network, we called it. Sometimes we'd call and talk about things that we make clear this can't go on the Bubby Network. But it was just wonderful to see him grow, get a family, community, a profession. I got to see him a few times over the last few years. He'll be missed, of course, by all of us. But it's cliche, but he really will live on in all of us. Thank you.
We'll hear today also from two more friends of Brian, from Jesse Flaxenberg, followed by Pat Miller.
Okay, I'll try to get through this as best I can. I wrote it down. When I thought about how to talk about Brian, I kept coming back to the fact that he was my best friend. And I think this says a lot about him. First, as I think a lot of people in this room can attest to, I'm a difficult person to get along with. So the fact that he did so all these years is a testament to his patience, understanding, and tolerance. But the real reason this tells a story about who he was is that I doubt I'm the only person here today who thinks that. I suspect there are plenty of people in this room and who are zooming in who think of Brian as their best friend. I actually was his best friend, but it doesn't seem appropriate that we argue about that today, but we can talk about it later. But that's who he was. To be in his presence meant that you had someone who understood you and cared about you. We would often meet for lunch on Friday afternoons, and even at the height of his illness, he would always greet me and ask me how I was doing and how my family was. And sometimes I would drone on and on about difficulties at work or how terrible my fantasy football team was doing, and I would catch myself. Hold on, aren't you the one here with actual troubles? Sure, but I just like hearing about how your fantasy football team is worse than mine. So, And I'll probably get in trouble for telling this story, but one year on our annual trip to Vegas to gamble and watch football, Pat, who was going to come up after me, disappeared. We woke up Sunday morning and we're heading to the sports bar to watch football, and Pat wasn't answering his phone, nor was he responding to texts. So Brian got nervous and asked me what we should do. Pat's a grown man. He knows what time kickoff is. He'll be there. Brian didn't like that answer, so he proceeded to call all of the emergency rooms in town, and then he moved on to the police departments. No dice. His next idea was to call Ann, Pat's wife. But this was a truly terrible idea with no upside whatsoever. So I did manage to talk him out of doing that. Long story short, Pat was on a blackjack heater, and his phone died. And clearly, as everyone knows, rule number 1 in Vegas is you never walk away from a heater, right, Pat? So, but Pat did show up at kickoff at the sports bar, and we proceeded to have a terrific day together. The point is that Brian's first instinct was always to care about others. It was never to think of himself. And I think that theme runs through everyone's memories today. I know everyone here has stories and memories of Brian, and maybe it's in the telling and retelling of those stories that we keep his memory alive. Rachel and Claire. He loved you girls so much, and he was so proud. It was really hard to get him to talk about his illness and how he was doing, but he just loved to talk about the both of you all the time. Mary, Jack, and Bobby, there was maybe slightly more kvetching about you folks, but it was all out of love. But I know we've all lost someone important to us, a son, a husband, a father, a brother, and I know the world is diminished by his absence. But mostly, I'm just sad that I lost my best friend. Thanks.
Hello. So when Jesse asked me if he could tell that story, I didn't know he was going to use my name. But we enjoyed our times in Vegas, and it's not coincidental that Jesse went before me because he's always about 2 steps ahead of Brian and I, so when we're walking down the streets. And I wanted to read a few paragraphs from this book written by David Brooks, and it's called The Road to Character, and as much as I admire David Brooks, he wasted a bunch of time writing this book because he could have just said, be like Brian, and saved all his research. But I wanted to share kind of the Cliff Notes version of the book, and I'm a Cliff Notes kind of guy. So occasionally, even today, you come across certain people who seem to possess an impressive inner cohesion. They're not leading fragmented, scattershot lives. They have achieved inner integration. They are calm, settled, and rooted. They are not blown off course by storms. They don't crumble in adversity. They don't crumble in adversity. And for Brian, I don't think his illness defined him. I think his illness demanded and allowed his virtues to flourish. Their minds are consistent and their hearts are dependable. Their virtues are not the blooming virtues you see in smart college students like his daughters. They are the ripening virtues you see in people who have lived a little and have learned from joy and pain. Sometimes you don't even notice these people, because while they seem kind and cheerful, they are also reserved. They possess the self-effacing virtues of people who are inclined to be useful, but don't need to prove anything to the world. Humility, restraint, reticence, temperance, respect, and soft self-discipline. They radiate a sort of moral joy. They answer softly when challenged harshly. They are silent when unfairly abused. They are dignified when others try to humiliate them, restrained when others try to provoke them, but they get things done. They perform acts of sacrificial service with the same modest, everyday spirit they would display if they were just getting the groceries. They are not thinking about what impressive work they are doing. He certainly had that chance because his gift as a provider paralleled every other one of his gifts. They are not thinking about themselves at all. An example of that, one of his moments was taking a fall and breaking his arm, and he had called a neighbor to get him to the hospital. He called me to ask which emergency room to go to. So I offered my advice, and then he said, "How was your trip?" Laying on the floor with a broken arm, asking how my trip was. They just seem delighted by the flawed people around them. And I think about that sentence. They just seem delighted by the flawed people around them. He must have been really delighted being with me. They just recognize what needs to be done and they do it. They make you feel funnier and smarter when you speak with them. They move through different social classes, not even aware, it seems, that they are doing so. After you've known them for a while, it occurs to you that you've never heard them boast. You've never seen them self-righteous or doggedly certain. They aren't dropping little hints of their own distinctiveness and accomplishments. I wanted to also share that over the last few weeks we were able to visit, and pretty much on every occasion when he was still more awake and alert, he would ask if I could get you something to drink. And I'm like, well, probably not. But that was his spirit. And as an aside, I was sweeping acorns off the driveway, and his parents pulled in. And Mom gets out of the car and asked, "Can I get you something to drink?" And I was like, what is it with these people? They've not led lives of conflict-free tranquility, but have struggled toward maturity. They've gone some way towards solving life's essential problem, which is, quote, "The line separating good and evil passes not through states, not between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart." These are the people who've built a strong inner character, who have achieved a certain depth. In these people, at the end of this struggle, the climb to success has surrendered to the struggle to deepen the soul. After a life of seeking balance, these are the people we are looking for. And Brian was never very comfortable when I said, "I love you," but I love you, Brian.
On a few occasions over the last couple of months, I was given the privilege of sitting with Brian and talking, sometimes with family there and sometimes not. It was maybe a month and a half ago or so that I got to the house and Brian apologized to me for not being my best congregant. I haven't shown up at the temple enough, I know. I said, on Yom Kippur, I'll forgive you. It'll be okay. And You know, when you go to rabbinical school, the one thing they don't teach you is how to be a rabbi. They teach you all kinds of great things about the Torah and the Talmud and all kinds of existential things to discuss. But they don't teach you how to be a rabbi. And there's something good about that, and there's something bad about that. But one of the things is that when we would sit in our classes, when I was back there studying, we would talk about all of these very big questions. And we would come up with our genius answers, so we thought, to all of these big questions. And then we finished rabbinical school and we moved on into the world to be rabbis, and all of those big existential questions disappeared because we had to go to board meetings and answer emails and prepare programs in the synagogue. And I sat with Brian and we talked about a lot of those big questions, trying to find out our answers, my answers and Brian's answers to those questions, trying to figure out what they might be. And I think we both agreed that the discussion, frankly, was more important than the answers. You know, I know that for the doctors in the room, and for any of you who visited a doctor who are in the room, which I hope is everyone in the room, sometimes we know the answer. It's this illness, it's this disease, you take this pill, you go to this emergency room, you do this, and we take care of it. But sometimes those answers don't come, and we figure out, well, what do we do with our spiritual palliative care? How do we take our souls and give ourselves spiritual hospice care? And it becomes a process. And a big part of that process is the idea of caring enough to think about the process. As we go from this place, I hope that when you give a little bit extra in caring for another person, that you might say, I know I need to care a little more because Brian would have wanted me to do that. When you spend time that could probably be spent with the business of the day, but you spend time with friends and family and bring them into an important place, I hope that you'll think, you know, Brian would have encouraged me to do that. And when you look for others to help, because you should look for others to help, I hope that you'll think Brian opened up my eyes to look for others who need help. In the hours and the days and the weeks to come, I hope that you'll continue to share the stories that we didn't share here in this room today, and that you'll be inspired. And when you're inspired, you'll be able to say these traditional words in our Jewish world. Yehi zichrono livracha. It means, may his memory be a blessing. Every time you remember Brian, may you know that it's a blessing. In a moment, we're going to rise so we can say the El Malei Rachamim Mourner's Prayer, after which we will make our way to the cemetery. Before we do, just a couple of important announcements for everyone. First of all, immediately following our graveside service, the Zable family invites you all to come back here to Temple Shalom. There will be a meal of condolence here. Jack told me the caterer brought a lot of food, right? And Jack, I think you and I both agree, no one's leaving till the food's finished. And we changed it to tuna fish and chicken because some rabbi got in the way and talked to Jack about kosher laws and things. I don't know who that was. But please do come back here right immediately following. And then this evening at the Zable home, the Shiva Minyan tonight will be at 6 p.m. I know for those of you who are temple members and got the notice that said 7 p.m., we'll be sending out another one this afternoon, just to remind everybody, the time's been changed to 6 p.m. for the Shiva Minyan at the Zable home. For those of you who do not know where Sons of Israel Cemetery is, very simply, as you leave the temple and go back out to Hancock, turn left on Hancock to go south. When you see the sign for Evergreen Cemetery, you'll make the left-hand turn into Evergreen Cemetery. Do not go into the gates of Evergreen Cemetery right before the gates of Evergreen. If you look to your right, you'll see a dirt road with a little tiny sign that says Sons of Israel Cemetery. You'll turn there, and that dirt road will take you around the outskirts of Evergreen and get you over to Sons of Israel Cemetery, and we'll finish our service there. Right now, we ask all of you to rise to recite the words of El Malei Rachamim. El Malei Rachamim, Shochin Bamromi, Amitzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Hashchina.